If that wasn't a clear God story that we're supposed to be standing here tonight, I don't know what is.
That is amazing.
We had literally asked our team member, Nicole, we're like, I'd love to be able to find some place, and it's probably going to require some calling around, to try to find some place that we can speak on Friday night, sort of halfway. And she sends an email like 2 days later, you're not going to believe this.
So we are just grateful to be here, obviously, because of that story. But we also know what you guys are giving up to be here. I mean, it's a Friday night, and, thank you. You're giving us your time, so we want to honor that.
And I want to say thank you to the dudes.
For sure.
For being here. Because we know a relationship conference is not a man's natural habitat.
So
right.
It isn't, so thank you guys. We have done them on Saturdays in the fall, which I just don't recommend to any church to put on.
Long ones
but they do
on
it.
Saturday in the fall. Yes.
So this topic that we're going to be talking about, it's the research project that we did probably 6, 7, 8 years ago on what is it that the happiest couples, what do they do differently? What is it that we can learn from them, from their habits, the things that make them what appear to be so happy? So we had given this talk up at a conference in Ohio probably 4 years ago. And we were standing out after the conference, out in the lobby, at the book table, and a gentleman, probably 15, 20 years my senior, came up to me with a folded piece of paper, handed it to me, and he walked away. And on the outside of the paper, it said, "The secret to a happy marriage." And so I kind of was curious, so I unfolded it, and in it, he had written this paragraph. He said, "When my wife and I were first married, we made a decision that she would handle all of the minor decisions that face the family, and I would handle and tackle all of the major decisions that face the family." And he said, "After 40 years of marriage, I can honestly say we've never had a major decision." So there you go. That takes this whole thing, 2 hours, condenses it down into one little story.
No.
Okay, so tell us what we need to know.
What is it that the secrets of the happiest couples, what is it they do differently? This is what we're going to be bringing to you based on a lot of years of research. We have now done, I haven't even added it up recently, 18 years, I think? How did that happen?
Yeah.
18 years of research with 40,000 men and women over the last 18 years. We have done 12 nationally representative studies in order to be able to come and say, this stuff is not our opinion. This is what we found on the surveys, for example, that really works, or this is how people really feel, or these are the factors that really matter. And so we encourage you all to keep in mind a couple things. So as you go, this isn't our opinion, but also keep in mind that we're going to be making generalizations, right? There's always going to be exceptions. Like one of our segments, one of the things we're going to be talking about is there's some statistical differences. Ooh, that's kind of loud, isn't it? There's some statistical differences between, for example, men and women in certain places. But by definition, if 75% of men said one way, by definition, 25% didn't, right? So everybody's an individual. The key is use this stuff as a starting point just to be able to start the conversation with your spouse. So we identified 12 in this one research project, which is based on the surprising secrets of highly happy marriages. This is the study we did for this book. We found 12 factors that really matter. We're not going to be able to get to all 12, so we're going to try to get to 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, not over the course of the next hour and a half, 2 hours.
Let's go.
Are we good? Okay.
Let's go.
So, and by the way, do you have that pen? I handed you
No.
a pen a minute ago. It's down on the floor
Oh,
somewhere.
I got it.
Anyway,
I got it.
no worries.
We got this one. Oh,
Well,
thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it.
That's handy, because I was going to take a note, and it just reminded me to suggest to you, do you guys have pens with you? If you want to take notes, if you want to put notes in your phone, honestly, I really encourage you to take notes so that you don't lose something that you go, oh, I wonder if that's my wife. I wonder if that's my husband. I think that would be a factor that would matter. Take notes in order to capture the stuff that really matters. Okay, factor number one, surprise number one. We don't realize this, but little things in marriage can make a really, really big difference. Little changes, little actions, little shifts of your behavior, doing things just a little bit differently can make a really, really big difference. When you start getting into any kind of issues in your marriage, in your relationship, when you start having clashes, when there starts to be tension, sometimes it can start to feel kind of big and overwhelming, right? It can start to feel like I don't know what to change and what to do, and we tend to get into these ruts where, you have that definition of insanity where you do the same thing over and over again to try to get a different result, right? And we don't necessarily know how to solve it, and it can seem like, oh my gosh, we're just two different temperaments, right? We're different Enneagram types or whatever it is, right? We're different in these big fundamental ways. It can seem a bit overwhelming. And yet, one of the things that we found is that it is really easy to focus on those problems and miss a much bigger picture. So let me tell you a story that sort of illustrates this, and you're going to look at me like I'm crazy because this story has nothing to do with marriage, but it illustrates this really well. There was a book called Switch, thank you, by brothers named Chip and Dan Heath a number of years ago. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that book, but it's like a business leadership-ish.
Yeah, one's a professor at Duke and the other is a professor at Stanford.
Yeah, so it's one of those. The book was basically, how do you change something? How do you improve something? How do you change your mind? How do you improve a department at work? How do you change a marriage? How do you change anything? And one of the factors that they found that really matter came just as we were starting to look at, should this be our next project? And here is the illustration that they found really, really matters for change of any kind. And that is to not just look at the problems, the things that are going wrong, but to look at what they call the bright spots. Look at the role models, the people who are doing it well. The example that they gave, the story that they told, which, like I said, has nothing to do with marriage, was of another type of problem that can sometimes seem big and overwhelming and have a lot of really crazy factors that makes it difficult to solve. They told a story of the 1980s.
It was in the early 1980s. The United Nations was studying and trying to help resolve childhood malnutrition in Southeast
Asia. And they sent this team of UN children's development researchers into these countries in Southeast Asia to try to solve childhood malnutrition, which was another big, overwhelming seeming problem.
And they weren't having any success as they were trying to do it in these countries.
It was the same definition of insanity. They would go in to try to solve something that looked so big, and they're thinking, how do you solve childhood malnutrition? You have to solve, poverty. How do you solve poverty? Or, the kids, the part of the issue is not having clean drinking water. How do you do you have to build water filtration plants or whatever? Or there's corruption. right? Like there's a lot of aid going into Southeast Asia, but it wasn't necessarily making it to the kids who most needed it. So you have to solve corruption. Like all of these things seem pretty impossible. So they went into country after country, tried all these things, and nothing changed. The needle did not move at all. And so they go into the next country along, and the next country along was Vietnam. And Jerry Sternin was the leader of the team who was going in, and he said basically, time out. This is ridiculous. We're going to do the exact same thing, and we're going to get the exact same result. And this isn't going to work. And so they sat down and they thought about it, and he basically said, you know, what if we approached it sideways? Not every child in Vietnam is malnourished, right? Some are doing just fine. So instead of spending $30 or $40 million to go in and try all these things that don't work, what if we spend a few $100,000 and spread out into the countryside and find all the well-nourished kids and find out what they have in common? So they did that. And they found, and they were worried that he was worried that they were going to find that what they all had in common was that they were the child of the richest person in the village, right? That's not replicable. You're not going to be able to change anything with that. And instead, that's not what they found. They found this one crazy factor, that when the mothers would make the porridge or the gruel in the morning for the kids, they would dip the water out of the river and strain it to strain out all the little stuff floating in the water, because it was considered kind of low class to have all the stuff floating in your porridge. So they would strain the water, use the water to make the porridge, and that was what most kids ate. The kids who were most well-nourished, their mothers skipped the step of straining the water. And in the process, they put it straight from the river, straight into the porridge, and in the process, they didn't strain out all the little vegetation and all the little shrimps in the water. These kids were getting more vegetables and protein than everybody else. And Jerry Sternin realized, oh my gosh, we don't need to solve poverty and corruption and build water filtration plants. We need to teach the mom not to strain the shrimp. And they did. And it solved the problem of systemic childhood malnutrition in Vietnam. Solved it. Now, of course, there's still malnourished kids in that country, but as a systemic issue, it completely eradicated it. And they ended up saying, let's do this in the next country along, and the next country, and the next country. And that is why Southeast Asia no longer has this massive systemic issue.
So the parallel
to
marriage
is this. It is so easy for us to focus on the big, overwhelming problems, like the equivalent of solving poverty when you're trying to solve a marriage issue. Oh my gosh, we come from two different families with completely different families of origin. He grew up, just shouting his way out of things, and I grew up running from things. Those seem like big issues, hard to solve. Or temperaments that don't necessarily seem to go together. It seems like, well, how do you solve that? Turns out, that's not necessarily the issue. And that instead, those are issues to address, but instead, what we can do is, instead of focusing on these problems, we can lift our heads and go, where are the bright spots? Where are the marriages that are doing great? If you look at the marriages that are the most happy marriages, what is they're doing differently than everybody else? And learn from them as a way of having a place to head to. Because if you're focusing mostly on the problems and trying to surface one problem after another in order to fix it, which isn't bad, like that's what you do in counseling, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's all you do, you're only focusing on the problems.
Can I offer a little caveat to that?
Yeah.
On the marriages, the folks that are doing it well. Oftentimes, and I can just tell you this from our research, they didn't know what they were necessarily doing well. It just was how they lived their life. And so the important part of this is the importance of community. I want to read a book, or I want to go to a seminar, and I want to get information. But actually, it's the application of that information that always changes us. And so I would encourage you in small groups, and that's why the body of Christ, a church, it's ideal for what we're talking about. It is, get involved with those couples, and don't just ask them, what do you do? Because they might not be able to necessarily tell you what they do that makes them so happy or successful. They'll give you some ideas, but watch them. Spend time with them. Yeah. That's what you do.
Spending time with the happiest couples, hanging out with other couples, just average couples who can encourage each other, and heading towards those bright spots and the role models and what can we do differently, that's not going to necessarily solve the big problems, if there are big problems, but it's going to make them a whole lot easier to solve. So if you're in one of those kind of difficult seasons, have hope, because we have seen radical changes coming from these small little adjustments, including, by the way, if only one spouse is doing them.
Exactly.
Of all the things we found, of the 12 factors that we found makes a huge difference for marriage, 11 of them mattered dramatically if only one person did them. So, okay, next topic. Okay, so the second topic that we want to mention is the next secret along. If the first secret is that little things will make a really big difference if you're focusing on the kind of the bright spots, the second one is what we actually have come to realize is almost a prerequisite for having a happy marriage. Everything else that we're going to describe, it's kind of like they're mix and match to some degree. Like, you don't have to do all of them. Just pick some of them. Pick something that works. This one is different. This one, you almost have to do this if you want to have a happy marriage. What we found is that the happiest couples, they believe the best of their spouse's intentions towards them, even when they're legitimately hurt. Everybody gets hurt. Everybody has stuff that just kind of, we're imperfect people.
Even the most godly Christian man and godly Christian woman can be a jerk at times. I mean, I know. For me. But it's there. That's who we are.
And unfortunately, we do hurt each other. We just do. Here's the key. If you want a happy marriage, you have to believe the best of your spouse's intentions towards you, their motivations towards you, even when that hurt comes. Here's how it tends to work. Like, I'll just give you a little example. So if in my sort of human nature, if Jeff does something to hurt my feelings, there's kind of this sense of, ow, and you kind of naturally, subconsciously think to yourself, he knew how that would make me feel, and he said it anyway, right? There's kind of this thing inside. The happiest couples, they either did this automatically or they had learned to do this on purpose. The happiest couples still had the ow, and then they went, no, I know he loves me. I know he cares about me, so he must not have known how that would make me feel, or he wouldn't have said it. They switch that in their heads. That's sort of a girl version. A guy version might be something like, ow, like nothing I do is ever good enough for her. No, I know she appreciates me, so she must not have recognized how that would come across. And they switch to believing something different about their spouse's intentions.
And this isn't just wishful thinking.
This is not just wishful thinking. It is, you might think, you're sort of putting on a happy face. No, actually, statistically, what we found in our research was that the vast majority of couples, it's 99.26, 7 something percent, like almost 100% of people deeply care about their spouse, even in the most distressed marriages where they were like on the verge of divorce. The number was 97% deeply care about their spouse. The issue is whether you allow yourself to believe it, because the happiest couples, they stopped and they said, there's got to be another explanation for this person's behavior. The least happy couples, the ones who were struggling, were having a hard time with that step. He knew how that would, he's only saying that because, or whatever. No, you have to believe that your spouse cares about you. We should tell them about Mike and what he told us when we started this process. You want me to do that? Okay. We have been finishing a book with a co-author. First time that we're doing a research-based book with a co-author.
And what's the subject?
No. You're going to have to say this because I still can't say this word publicly.
It's on sex. And my Midwestern sensibilities are embarrassed just to stand up here and say that we've written a book about sex. And it's not about technique or anything like that. It's about what's underneath the surface that messes us up so much. And our co-author is one of the foremost authorities on therapy and sexual issues. He's just a brilliant guy, nationally known, and a believer. And so what he would always say,
one of the things that we found in the study is that what we're saying here right now really also matters for your intimate life, of believing the best of your spouse's intentions towards you. And we started talking about with him, because he's the big counselor. Like, we're just researchers, right? Like, we don't know stuff. People come up to me after an event and say, how do I handle conflict management the best? I'm like, I don't know. Let me do a 2-year research study and I'll get back to you. I don't know. But he does. And one of the things that he told us, because he's been in counseling and he's been a therapist for 35 years, he said, what we find is that in the vast majority of cases, you have 2 options. Is something a bad heart of this person who's hurt your feelings, or is it bad skill? Excuse me. Is it a bad heart, or is it bad skill? And he said, almost everybody, it's bad skill. Somebody just doesn't realize they're doing something, or they're just having a bad day, or they don't know how to make somebody feel loved, or whatever. And I said, okay, well, we should probably put in the book, if you have statistics on this, like what you've seen over the 35 years you've been doing this, what are some numbers for the bad heart thing? And he kind of thought about it for a second, and he said, maybe 6-ish. And I said, 6%, that's a big number. Based on our study, I would have thought it was a lot less than that, but okay. He was like, no, 6 people in 35 years that he would say it was just a bad heart. Almost always, it's bad skill, which allows us to have grace with one another.
Again, back to Shaunti's earlier statement that this stuff will work even if just one of you practices it and puts it into motion. There was a study I found when we were doing the research, and it was by a University of Maryland professor, and the study was ultimately called The Power of Good Intentions. And in this study, it was a study of college students. And I gotta tell you, I love college students, because for $20, they will subject themselves to just about anything. But we get good data from it, so it's awesome. So in this particular study, the students, one student, the subject, was in a chair, seated in a chair, and hooked up to all these biometric measuring devices, to measure heart rate, pulse, blood pressure, skin, sweat, all of that sort of stuff. And they were also hooked up to a cable that was run across the room to a partition. And behind the partition was a little device with a red button on it that if the red button was pushed, it would send an electric shock to that person sitting in that chair. And it was a real electric shock, an unpleasant electric shock. Now, the person in the chair was told that someone behind the partition was standing over that button. And in one case, they were told when they push the button, they've been told that yes, it'll administer a shock, but they've also been told that it will help the person in the chair win money. Don't know how that works.
Sort of a good intention.
Yeah. They were told of a second person who, when they hit the button, they were doing it on accident. They didn't mean to push it. And then there was a third person that when they hit the button, they knew it would administer a shock. And they thought it was kind of cool. Kind of enjoyed doing that. So in all cases, the shock was exactly the same voltage, amperage, or what. I'm showing my ignorance of electricity here. But in that particular case, what they found from all of the measuring devices was that when someone who thought that the person on the other side was doing it on purpose, that they thought it was cool, it hurt a lot, and it measured that way. If they thought the person was doing it on accident, it hurt less, and it registered. And if they thought the person had their best intentions at heart, it hurt dramatically less. The shock was absolutely the same. The only thing that was different was the perception of the person administering it. And that's what it's like. That's what Shaunti's talking about. That's like when our spouse accidentally sends that electric shock our way, if we can tell ourselves, look, I know she loves me. I know she thinks, I'm doing okay. She couldn't have known how that was going to make me feel. It will hurt less. It just will.
We should give them an example. So one of the things that we really enjoyed doing was we would interview, in addition to the big national surveys, we would interview couples, all different sort of stages where they were in the happiness, whatever. And we really wanted to sort of learn from the happiest couples in particular, their patterns. What are their patterns? How do they handle things differently? An example of what we're talking about, there was a couple who lived sort of in a semi-rural area, not too far from a major city. And they had lived in like New York City or somewhere before, and they were both foodies. Like they loved having great restaurant food. But they lived in this area that didn't have a ton of that. And so it was like, oh, bummer. Well, one day, and by the way, they were a young couple. They eventually got pregnant, and the due date was like 6 months down the road. And one day they saw that this new restaurant, which was going to be a really, really high-end, like foodie-centered restaurant, was opening up in their town. And it was already like the waiting list was already, booked up. And so they got on the waiting list for when it was going to open, and it was about a month before her due date. And that was like the first time they could get on it. And so they're like, as they're driving by, as this restaurant is being built, they're so excited. And they were going, 4 more months, 3 more weeks, 2 more days, until
not to the birth of their child, but to the opening of the restaurant.
To the opening of the restaurant. Well, for them to be able to get their reservation time, which was all booked up. They were all excited about this. The night of the reservation, because this was the last chance, this was going to be their last big fling before the baby came and their lives changed forever. Yeah. The night of the reservation comes, and her husband takes a client call at 6 o'clock and misses the reservation. And she is so devastated. And she's sitting there 8 months pregnant, knowing that this was their last chance. There's no way that they're going to be able to get another reservation before the baby comes. And he comes running in, all like kerfuffled, all his hair askew. And I'm like, what is going through your mind? Remember, this is one of the highly happy couples. What's going through your mind? And she said, instantly, I'm like, I can't believe, is this what our life is going to be like now, that there's a baby coming? Like, he's going to be working all these hours. I'm going to be like a single mom, and her brain is going in all these directions. And then she goes, and now remember, I haven't like told her what we found. I'm literally just asking her the story. And then she said, and then I thought to myself, no, he was just as excited as I was. He was going 2 more days also. So there's got to be another explanation. So when he comes running in all frazzled, he's all defensive, he knows he's messed up. And instead of going and launching on him, I can't believe that you did this, she had gone through this process of going, there has to be another explanation. And so she said, I am so disappointed, because, you have to be able to say, I'm disappointed. I'm so disappointed. What happened? Assuming something happened, right? And he was able to lower his defensiveness because he was all, upset. And he was able to explain that at 6 o'clock, he was literally about to leave, and his office phone rings, and he was going to let it go to voicemail, but the little thing that said who was calling was one of their main clients. And he turned his head and he realized his boss is standing like 5-6 feet behind him. And he's like, I have a wife and a baby on the way. I can't afford to be on anybody's question mark list for whether I'm, a diligent employee. And so I took the call and, it delayed me. Now, you can have a conversation about maybe you should have asked him to call you on your cell phone. But anyway, you could deal with, well, maybe that wasn't the best choice of how to handle it, but the key was his intentions towards her were good, not bad. And by her assuming that, it preserved their happiness rather than undermining it. That choice makes a dramatic difference every day, and we all have opportunities to do that every day. Should we move on to the next topic? Okay. So the next thing is kind of fun because it actually relates a lot to the original studies that we did on our books for women only and for men only, which are understanding, for women only it's basically what you need to know about the inner lives of men, and for men only is a guide to the inner lives of women. And we were really, really surprised when we started doing this study of the happiest couples. And we saw a couple things that tied all the way back to that original research, because it turned out that the happiest couples, the husbands tended to do the same 5 things for their wives. This is not like finding out what matters to the wife and doing that. This was the same 5 things. And the wives tended to do the same 5 things every day for their husbands. The same 5 things. It was weird. But it was all related to what we found in the study of men and women. Do you want me to
keep going?
Do you want to do the?
You're on a roll.
Okay. So, sorry, my earrings are clicking, so I'm going to take them off because I can tell that Adam is back there like wincing as my earrings are clicking. Okay, so here is the main thing that we found, that if you will get this, it opens up your eyes to all this stuff that you didn't realize was happening, all this stuff you didn't realize was going on. So one of the primary factors that is running under the surface of much of the heartache, the tension, conflict, the day-to-day stuff that tends to happen, is we don't recognize what's going on is that men and women tend, this is again generalizations, this is not everybody, we tend to have 2 different sets of primary insecurities.
So what hurts my feelings is different.
Is going to be different than what hurts my feelings. Again, generalizations. We found that the numbers of everything we're going to share here, it was about 75 to 85% of men, about 75 to 85% of women. But so there's always that exception. And so let me give you an example of something that happened to sort of show this point of just how different we can be. We were doing a series of focus groups. I think it was just me that night. I was doing a series of focus groups. One night, I had a group of college-age young men in the room, and the next night, a group of college-age young women, so like 20, 21 years old. And you know those conference rooms where you have the big conference table and then the whiteboards on the walls with those doors that close? You know what I'm talking about? There were two of those. And so the first night I was in there with the guys, and I opened up the whiteboard, and I told the guys, I want to do something a little bit different tonight. Like, I want to kind of chart and capture what it feels like to be a guy. Like, what is it that when someone says this or does this that it hurts your feelings? Not that any, 20-year-old guy is going to say, it hurts my feelings, but you know what I mean. What are those things that hurt? And what is it that lights you up? Like, what feels great if someone says this or does this, that it feels great? So kind of like your fears and insecurities and your needs, basically, is what we were charting. So we spent all night on it. We got it all just right. They told me what to write. And at the end of the night, I realized I was out of time. The girls were going to be in there the next night. I didn't have time to erase this whole thing. So I just closed those doors. The next night, I'm in there with the girls. And I open up this whiteboard, and I'm like, let's chart your fears and your needs as girls. I sort of explained this whole thing. And one of the young women raised her hand and interrupted me. And she said, excuse me, but I really object to this language. I'm like, okay. And she said, it's not our fears and our needs as girls or women. We're all just people, right? We have the same fears, we have the same needs as people. And I said, that's fine. Let's chart your fears and your needs as people. And so we spent all evening on it. They told me what to write, erased, rewrote it, got it all just right. And then at the end of the night, I left 5 extra minutes. You knew what I was going to do, right? And so I said, the guys were in here last night. Does anybody want to see what the guys said? And of course, these 20-year-old girls are like, yes, So I opened up this whiteboard, and then I stood back, and I watched their faces as they were processing what they were seeing on these 2 boards. Their jaws were dropping open because there was not one word the same. Not one. Except for, and, the, right? Not one. So what was on the board? Here's the bottom line. We don't have time to get into all of what's behind this, but I'm just going to give you the summary. The bottom line is that what we've seen from girls and women age 15, we've done the surveys age 15 to 75 for women and age 15 to 75 for men. And across all of that, depending on the survey, depending on the group, it's 70 to 75%, 75 to 85% of women. The question, the worry, the insecurity in the heart is basically, am I lovable? Am I special? Am I beautiful? Am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? And so we love to feel loved, right? And cherished and adored. And that's what lights us up, right, ladies? Like, that's kind of what we think is the whole point of having the relationship to begin with. Like, if you're not going to feel loved, what's the point? And it's a big surprise to find out that for most men, that's not the point at all, because men had a very different insecurity. Their insecurity wasn't, am I lovable, but am I able? Am I adequate? Do I measure up? Do I have what it takes? Am I any good at what I do on the outside? Think about the difference there. Am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? Am I any good at what I do on the outside? It's totally different. And it lends itself to a totally different set of needs where instead of wanting to feel loved and cherished, men have a slightly different need.
So these 5 things that these couples were doing, the happiest couples, went to answer those questions,
Yes.
correct?
The 5 things tended to speak directly to that insecurity. Yes.
So guys, if I were to ask you, and I'm going to ask you, what words are they that your wife loves for you loves to hear from you?
Can I tell them what the need was first?
Yeah, sure.
Can I
yes,
is that
yes,
okay?
yes.
Just because, just to wrap it up, for the women, we love to feel loved. For the men, because the insecurity is different, the men said, that's nice. Like, it's not like that's bad, that's nice. But the men said if they had to make a choice, they would actually give up feeling that their wife loved them if they could just feel that she appreciated them and that she respected them and that she believed in him and admired him and trusted him. All of those things were far more important to the average guy, even than feeling that his wife loved him. And that's what we tend to need to grapple with,
what makes it difficult for women is because for us guys, we kind of know the words that she wants to hear, right? She wants to hear you say, I love you, right? That's what lights her up because that's speaking to that insecurity, that question inside of her. So as Shaunti is learning all of this stuff, she's trying to think, well, there's got to be a parallel then for men. If when Jeff says, I love you, then I know what that makes me feel, how that makes me feel good inside. So there must be something that I can say to him that is equivalent. And so when she was doing this and she's kind of practicing on me, because I'm
experimenting.
I'm the guinea pig. And so she would come up to me at random times and say, you know, Jeff, I so respect you. Okay, good to know. And this went on for like 2 weeks, just random occasions. I would hear, I so respect you. And finally, it was like, okay, I hate to say this, but can we do a timeout? I said, you know, I get where you're going with this and what you're trying to do. And I know that you're thinking that the words, I love you, what they do for you, that I respect you, will do for me. And I don't think they do. Now, I can't tell you what words will do that, but those aren't it. So she went on a quest for
several years
until this project.
Yep.
Until she found what it was.
And when we started interviewing and surveying all the happy wives, we realized they said this to their husbands every day. The happiest couples, without probably knowing it, the wives either automatically or on purpose had figured out what it was that would light him up. And we've been trying to get this word out there for now about 5 years. And it's a small little phrase, and some of you can probably guess it by now. Can anybody take just a guess? Just shout it out, what this phrase you can tell your husband, what it might be. Good job. Somebody said good job. That's good. Somebody said something else. Awesome. You're awesome. Say it again. Thank you. And I appreciate you, but believe it or not, it's thank you. Okay, the other day somebody yelled out, let's have sex.
Which for most guys is pretty close to working to.
It wasn't this phrase that came out on the survey, but no, believe it or not, ladies, his equivalent of I love you is thank you. And if you think about it, the reason makes perfect sense. Because remember what he's questioning, that big, strong man who's sitting next to you, who looks so confident in himself, has so much vulnerability in this one area of wondering, am I any good at what I do? I want to be good for her, but am I? And when you notice something simple, it's the day-to-day stuff. It's not usually the big, huge stuff. It's the day-to-day stuff. When you notice that he changed the light bulbs that's been driving you nuts, and you say, thank you so much for doing that. That's been driving me nuts. You have no idea, but inside what's just happened is you've just said, I noticed what you did on the outside. That's the first thing. I noticed that you did it, and it was good. And I appreciated it, and it mattered to me. And all of those things are so overwhelming for the average man. That is what he's longing to hear and to feel, because that is where he questions himself in a different way. And so that, believe it or not, we don't have time to get to all 5, unfortunately, but that's one of them that really, really matter.
Should we
flip it?
Flip it?
Yep.
So I think it's the...
Well, yes. Okay, so here's the thing that, and you can probably tell the dudes, like, you know that she needs to feel loved, but I don't think the guys realize how easy.
Well, tell them what the little thing that the guys would do in public.
Okay, yeah. So we found that this was sort of odd, but we found that in the happiest marriages, one of the things the guys did a lot is when they were sitting in a public place, like at church or out to dinner with friends, they would put their arm around their wife. Okay, somebody back there literally just did this. Good job. Yeah. Every other guy in the room is like, dang, it's too late now. But we found that they would put their arm around their wife, or they would put their hand on her knee, or hold her hand when they're walking through a parking lot, or whatever it was. There was some gesture that said one thing. It basically said, you're mine. Like, I would choose you all over again. That's what the gesture, whatever the gesture was, that's what it said. And it speaks to a woman's insecurity, because I don't think guys realize.
Guys just don't realize this. And I'll just give you a quick little story. When we were doing the work on this, it was one afternoon we were writing or whatever, and we were both, it was lunchtime, and I said, you want to go down to the sandwich shop down the road, and let's get something to eat for lunch. And Shaunti goes, great. So we pull into this little shopping center. We're walking through the rows of cars, and we're talking. I'm standing kind of walking closest to the cars, and Shaunti's kind of like out in the middle of the lane. And I notice as we're walking and as she's talking, a car starts to come down our lane. And so I walk over to her and put my hand around her waist, and kind of pull her close to me, and we walk in. That was it. The next day, we were doing a focus group with 10 women, me and another guy who were the kind of observers. and this focus group, Shaunti was leading it and asking the women, what are some of the little things that men can do that signal to you that he loves you and that you feel cherished and adored?
And we should explain that the key thing that many guys don't realize is that they know she needs to feel loved. You don't realize how easy it is for her to not feel loved.
Correct.
Like, that doesn't go away just because you get married.
Just
like
the same way that we
yeah.
feel insecure. If she says, hey, good job, if our boss the next day says something that deflates us,
yeah.
we struggle. That's our insecurity. So we're sitting in there, and they're kind of brainstorming, what are some of those little things? And Shaunti said, well, I've got a story. Just yesterday, Jeff and I were walking through a parking lot, and he came over to me as we were walking, and he put his hand in the small of my back and pulled me close to him, and we walked into the restaurant together, and all the women in the focus group went, that's what they did. And me and this other guy are looking at each other like, what just happened? Because let me tell you what was going through my mind the day before. We get out, exit the car, Shaunti's talking. She doesn't see that car. It's gonna hit her. She's not paying attention. Okay, so I walk over kind of hesitantly to pull her close. And it wasn't because I wanted her to get hit by the car or whatever, but because if our positions had been reversed and she had done that to me, I would have said, I see the car, I'm not gonna get hit. She thought none of that. All she thought was Jeff loves me and cherishes me. And so the challenge for us as guys, in these little things that you can do, is to get out of our guy mind, because it doesn't speak to us. So we don't think to do these things, just as they don't think to say thank you. And that's where the grace comes in. They're noticing, we're noticing, but we just kind of forget to do it.
Yeah.
And now you have to tell both men and women what to do when their spouse tries to practice these
Okay,
things.
yeah, because let me tell you, right now, there are, how many people are in here? 100 couples, 250 couples? There are now 148 men who are going, dang, right? Like, I didn't do this. And so some point tonight, he's going to do this to you. You are not allowed to say, you were only doing that because she told you to. Okay? And guys, at some point, your wife is going to go, oh, thank you so much for painting the walls, because that's been a need that we've had. Or thanks so much for taking the kids and taking them to their activities. And you're going to go, you are only saying that because they told you to, right? No. Believe the best. Remember? This is how we feel about each other. The key is that we have to let ourselves believe that these things are how our spouse feels
So
about us.
if I'm correct, we have a break at 7:35. So 5 minutes.
5 more minutes.
So let's
Can
hit one of my favorite secrets. And it always kind of like messes with people. And it messes with like the premarital counseling folks and
Yeah,
and
we're
all
going to
of that. So we're gonna
apologize
in advance. But here's what happened. As we were kind of learning and trying to figure out this research, what we did was we interviewed couples around the country that whenever we would go speaking, have an engagement, we would ask for the venue to provide us with 4 of their happiest couples so that we could interrogate them. And so that's what we did. And in almost every one of those situations, when we would ask them, what's one thing that you think that, is a great thing that people should always know and that you do in your marriage? And they said, well, you don't go to bed mad. You just don't go to bed mad. To which
I would always say, oh, absolutely. That's really important advice. So do you ever go to bed mad? Well, it's a really important principle. And we were telling Jessica and Jack the other day, I'm like, no. I completely get that it's an important principle. It is an important principle, but that's not actually what I'm asking. Mr. and Mrs. Happily Married Couple, do you ever go to bed mad? Well, yeah, sometimes. And here's what we found that to me was so fascinating. Because it turns out that, yes, Ephesians 4:26, don't let the sun go down on your anger, okay?
be angry and sin not.
Yes, in your anger, don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Incredibly important principle. However, what the happiest couples did in practice, statistically, in huge numbers, is that they had learned that when you have 2 angry, exhausted, upset people trying to duke it out at 1 a.m, like nothing good is going to come from that point on, right? And they had learned that there was actually great wisdom to be had in going, time out. Can we just put this on pause until tomorrow morning? And sometimes the next morning, like you wake up and you go, what was that about, right? Because just a good night's sleep solves it. But here's what we found was the difference between the happiest, most happily married couples and everybody else, is that if that issue was still there the next day, they dealt with it. Everybody else was far more likely to just kind of hope the issue went away and not deal with it. The happiest couples didn't do that. They dealt with it. So statistically, what the deal wasn't what they did the night before. It was what they did the next morning.
Now, Shaunti is this really did create some turmoil in our research as we were going through this, because everything that we've always done has always kind of fit hand in glove with what the Word of God says. So does it really matter what the happiest couples did if it was in opposition or contradictory to something that Scripture says? And she, I'll tell you, Shaunti loves the Scripture and lives it with her life. And she, at nighttime, would wear me out if we were having a disagreement. It was like, no, we cannot go to sleep because we want God's favor in our marriage and in our family. We can't do that. We have to resolve this. And I would fall into lawyer mode.
Because he's an attorney.
Lawyer. And I would say, look, we didn't start fighting until the sun was down, so I have 24 hours before it's down again. Good night. Not the best advice.
Didn't
for you
always
guys.
work so well.
Didn't really win the day. So,
but the issue still was a big one in my mind of, does it matter if the happiest couples do this if it's unbiblical, right?
Yeah.
Because like Jeff said, everything that we found in all of these massive nationally representative studies has always backed up what the Bible has said all along. It's awesome.
So a pastor friend came to our rescue.
He did. We told him we were really wrestling with this, and he started laughing, and he was like, look, first of all, he showed me he had his printed Bible with him, and he showed me in it, he's like, first of all, the passage, don't let the sun go, in your anger don't sin, do not let the sun go down in your anger. In that passage, it's not even talking about marriage, it's talking about living in community. But still, if you look at it, and you can see the little caret in the Bible that says that the Apostle Paul was actually quoting a well-known verse from the Old Testament, and that his audience would have been quite familiar with. And here's the verse that Paul was quoting, Psalm 4:4. Psalm 4:4, go look it up. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Think about it overnight and remain silent.
I love that verse. I love it.
And so the key, as this pastor friend of ours pointed out, he's like, look, what is really being said here is, in your anger, don't sin. What is it that you need to do to not sin in your anger? If it's to duke it out at 1 a.m. so that you don't resent something, or so that you don't agree to something that you wish you wouldn't have, or say something you wish you wouldn't have, if you need to do that between the two of you, do that to not sin in your anger. But if you need to think about it overnight and remain silent so you don't say something you'll regret, do that. And the key to me is that also fits hand in glove with what the happiest couples were doing. So I think we're ready for our break. Is Pastor? Okay. So we have 3 or 4 more that we're going to do after the break of these happiest.
Thank you.
Couple secrets. Cool. I walked in and I said, Lisa, can you save me some of those strawberry skewers? Because those look really good. Were they good? Oh my gosh, they look amazing. Okay. Oh, my pen ended up somewhere else. Here. Oh, okay, thank you.
Next secret.
Next secret. Okay. Is your mic on?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
I forgot.
So, the next secret it is a fun one, and I'm going to let you diagnose it. I'm going to tell you what we heard from one guy, and I want you to do the same thing as you're listening to me telling the story. Do the same thing that we did as we were listening to him originally, which is, what's going on? What is it that's allowing him and his wife to be so happy, to be those highly happy couples? And so Jeff always loved whenever we started talking to a highly happy couple.
Because we would always ask them, could you take us through your last fight? And it just, even if it was in the past, it kind kind of stirs up emotions from time to time, even for the happy couples. So it was kind of fun. Anyways.
Would you be one of those people pushing the button because it was causing a shock?
Probably.
So we talked to this one couple, highly happy couple, said, take us through your last fight. And they both kind of looked at each other like, ugh. So here's what had happened the week before. So this guy was a senior executive at a large company, and he had been spending about 2 or 3 months on a really big and exhausting deal with his company. And finally he was working like 80-hour weeks. He was never at home. And finally he comes to the week when Thursday morning he is going to get on a plane at 6 o'clock in the morning and fly away to actually close this big deal that he'd been working on. So Wednesday, the day before, he called his wife 3 times from the office because he had been working around the clock, and he was in one of those jobs where you need to wear a suit, and he didn't have any shirts left. All of his shirts, every single one of them, 100% of them were at the dry cleaners. And so he called his wife 3 times, and he said, look, I know you're really busy. She was a mom with 3 little kids. They were doing a lot of stuff. I know you're really busy. I can leave the office at lunch if I have to. I can go pick up the dry cleaning because I have to make sure we get the dry cleaning before they close. And she's like, no, honey, I got it. You sure? Because I can go. No, honey, I got it. So he comes home at 9 o'clock at night to find the dry cleaners are closed and she's forgotten to get the shirts.
Oh, yeah, I heard that one.
And he is like so upset. We're like, what did you do? He's like, well, I was just so upset I couldn't even think. And he describes he went downstairs to his workshop because apparently one of his hobbies is woodworking. And so we're like, what were you doing? And he said, so I was like, I grabbed my like rubber mallet and I'm like pounding some pieces of wood together. And we're like, what are you thinking? And he's like, I'm thinking that I've been working 80 hours weeks and I'm exhausting myself for the family, and she doesn't even care that I'm doing this because she forgot, and I asked her 3 times. But you know what? That's really not fair because, the kids were sick and she was having to run around to doctor's appointments all day and then different pharmacies, and then she had to get them their meals and get them to, their other appointments. And then she made sure that she made dinner for me, even though I was going to be home at 9 o'clock at night. And she's an amazing wife. And she makes dinner for me no matter how late I come home at night. She's just so amazing. And why am I being such a jerk? Okay, now, that's basically what he was saying to us. What was he doing? Diagnose what just happened in his mind and heart. Come on, shout it out. What was he doing? He was what?
He was thinking.
About her intentions. Yep, he was believing the best of her intentions. Keep going. That's one of them. He was giving her grace. Keep going. Putting himself in her shoes. Hitting stuff with a hammer. He was definitely hitting stuff with a hammer. You know what he was doing? Switching. How was he switching? How was he changing his mind? He was changing his feelings as he went by talking himself out of being mad. He was talking himself out of being mad. How specifically did he talk himself out of being mad? She always makes me dinner. Like, no matter how late I come home, she's always willing to do this. He was talking himself out of being mad by literally changing the trajectory of his thoughts to focus on the good, not the bad. And to focus on those very real things. We have a tendency to believe that we can change what we do, but our feelings just are what they are. If that is true, then that means that we are slaves to our feelings. We know that's not the case. We had one woman who wrote us in. Wait, who was it that just told me that they worked at Proverbs 31? Somebody just told me. Yep, there you go. Literally, I was speaking at a Proverbs 31 event a couple of years ago, and a woman wrote me right afterwards, who was a volunteer at Proverbs 31, and she said, I have learned that either my feelings can boss me around or I can boss my feelings around. And that's what I need to do. And we realized that is exactly what the happiest couples would do. They would choose to change their feelings as they went by focusing on what was good. And it's interesting, we actually started our marriage for the first, 10, 12 years or so of our marriage. We had an okay marriage. It wasn't bad. It was definitely kind of in the middle.
But there were nights when she slept in one room and I slept in another because we went to bed mad.
I'm not going to sleep next to someone who doesn't care about me.
It happened. Because we'd tell ourselves stories.
And when we started the research for this project, we suddenly realized, according to the kind of the criteria that we used to identify the happiest couples, we're like, wait a minute, we're in that category of the happiest couples. What changed? And it wasn't until we started doing this research on this topic that we realized one of the big things that had changed in our marriage. And it had happened 2 years before this, and I didn't even notice at the time that this was what had made a big difference. Would you mind telling them that story?
I will. So, a few years ago, Shaunti turned 39. The next year, she was going to turn 40. And so anyways, I had decided that I wanted to make something really special, do something special for her. So in my craziness, I thought, I'll write her a book. What I'll do is I will journal every day of her 39th year, compile it all, and then on her birthday, hand her this book that is a year in the life of Shaunti and our family.
Little journals of what happened the day.
Of what happened.
Now, every guy here is like, I hate this person
now,
right? You do
I
realize
hesitate to say this because I realize what you guys are thinking. Let me put your minds at ease. I am the worst gift giver on the planet. And she's agreeing. For example,
I'm not contradicting you. Let's just say that. I'm not
when she was
contradicting
pregnant with our daughter, our first child, who's 21 now, at Christmas time, she was 5 months pregnant. I gave her a pregnancy workout video. Who does that? Apparently me. So I had a lot of ground to catch up or make up with this gift. So here's what happened. I wanted this book, this journal, to be accurate. So some days, at the end of the day, things weren't so good. And I would always write at the end of the day down in my office on my computer, and I would then I'd take notes throughout the day, mental notes or little notes in my phone, and then I would type them all up, at the end of the day.
And sometimes it was just a few sentences.
Sometimes a few sentences,
it was a paragraph,
sometimes it was a
or
page. And what ended up happening was I wanted to be honest, and so sometimes I'd be going, and we had a fight about this, and
you did this, and you did this.
And you did this. And as I'm writing, I'm kind of thinking, dang, our kids might read this 30 years from now, and they'll go, Dad, you were such a jerk. So as I'm doing that, I wanted to be accurate, so I would recount that. But then I would go, but you know what?
I don't want to sound like a jerk.
I don't want to sound like a jerk. So then I would remind myself of all of the things that Shaunti does that I don't necessarily give her credit for throughout every day. And I would be saying, but you do this always so well, and you're great at this and this. by the time I finished my writing for the night, all of that heat that I was feeling was gone. And I didn't realize that 365 days of that built a habit of telling myself a story when I was upset about the good things that she does. And so it's kind of my favorite verse in all of the Bible is Psalm 103:2. And Psalm 103:2 is really simple. It's praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. It's by reminding ourselves of God's faithfulness, of his goodness in our lives, that by looking backward, that we can go forward with hope. And that's what I was able to do, and not because I was so superhuman. It just, without my knowing it, it became something of a habit in our lives, and it changed how we engaged with one another.
And this is a perfect example of what we were saying at the very beginning. Of most of these secrets, most of them work really well if only one person does them. I had no idea that he was doing this and didn't even know the impact of this until several years later when we kind of thought back and went, wait, and he explained this.
And can I kind of just jump? So what's some of those, and it's going to sound stupid, what some of the arguments were about, but it is those stupid little arguments that sometimes make up our lives. And Shaunti is, I've never met a person more organized mentally than Shaunti.
I know what you're going to say next.
She carries so much in her head, and she is so handy to have around. Everything is there in a perfect place. Physical organization, household stuff is less.
It's not my giftedness. Let's just say it that way.
And I, unfortunately, maybe it's the lawyer mentality, I don't know, but everything in its place, and everything has a place. And I kind of just maybe too neat, OCD, I don't know.
I didn't get that gene.
And so we were oftentimes, and it was like, how could she not see this here? You know, I'm always trying
the
to
mail
keep this,
piled
all
up.
of these things. And it would it'd boil over into frustration. And it was one day, I was kind of thinking about all of the things. Our kids were little. There were toys strewn everywhere. And, you know, the other mess that was maybe Shaunti created was also there in the house. And when I came in, I thought, you know, when I was single, I had an apartment and it was so neat and orderly. And I was all alone. And you know what? Those dishes or clothes or whatever, that's evidence that Shaunti's in my life. And those toys belonged to two kids that loved me and called me dad. And it was just a mind shift that instead of looking at it as a point of frustration, if God did it for me, I was able to look at it as a point of evidence of something good in my life. And we can do that in all these areas with our spouse.
So we just have to learn to boss our feelings around. Change your train of thought even as it's going by focusing on the good. Okay, next topic. Now this one is not in the Happy Marriages book because it is something that we found in the most recent study that we just completed on that topic that I can't talk about, that I'm going to have to learn how to talk about because we just wrote a book about it.
Sex.
Yeah. People are like, can we say sex in church?
I think so. We just did.
But one of the topics that we found on one of that topic's kind of the little things that make a big difference in that area is also something that it turns out applies to marriage in a really, really important way. Marriage overall. And so this is kind of a bonus one that we're giving you. And picture this as a little scenario. Picture that there are 3 children, And they're walking into a playroom, and there's toys and there's whatever, and they've been there before, maybe, but they're walking into this playroom, and there's 3 different reactions in these 3 different children. Child number 1 is kind of in autopilot. I've been here before. I'm going to the toys that I always play with. I know what I'm doing, and makes a beeline for those toys. Autopilot. Child number 2 is kind of like, yeah, these stupid toys again. Okay, kind of that condescending, like, I don't really want to be here. This is dumb. Child number 3 is like, ooh, what's that? I've seen that before, but, that's new. That's new. Oh, this one? And he starts playing with the toy, and if it doesn't work right, he doesn't go, oh, this is stupid. If it doesn't work right, he goes, I wonder how to make it work right. And he has a curious mindset. Now, if you had to choose which of those 3 kids that you wanted to play with, which would you play with? Which one? The third one, right. All of us, nobody wants to play with the critical one, and we probably don't want to play with the person who's on autopilot, right? So all of us would want to be friends with the third one. Now, let me ask you another question. Which of those 3 kids do you want to be? If you had to choose to be one, you probably choose the curious one, right? It turns out that that same factor makes a really, really big difference in marriage. We found in this latest study that one of the primary factors that includes marriage, that improves marriage and intimacy, is curiosity. Is literally the, who, what, when, where, how, and why. Like, kind of the, wow, I didn't realize this about you. Why did my spouse respond that way? Even if it's like not necessarily something in a good way, like curiosity, if something was upsetting them, I wonder why. What's going on? Or just kind of a mindset that wakes up in the morning with an attitude of, I want to learn. I don't want to be on autopilot.
So put you on the spot. In the research that we did on sex,
yeah.
What does that curious thing look like?
We have to be careful how we say this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the factors that we found that really matters is literally, this is going to sound funny, but it's literally going, I wonder if this matters to my spouse, or why did they have that reaction when I did that or said that? Like, not, I can't do anything right, or this is frustrating me, and so I'm going to back away. But if something doesn't work right, they kind of lean in and go, I wonder why.
So in the case of, a couple where, let's say that one spouse approaches the other to initiate.
Okay.
And the other spouse kind of, pulls away.
Yeah.
What does the curious spouse do? I mean, if the one who was the initiator is the curious one, let's just say. Because
the normal human response is fine, right? It's
your feelings get hurt.
Your feelings get hurt, and you pull away, and you have that kind of critical mindset. The curious spouse, they go, okay, challenge accepted. I'm going to figure out what that was about. I didn't realize that my spouse was mad at me, or maybe I just touched them weird. Like, challenge accepted. I'm going to figure out what it is that's going on. And so there's would you like to talk about anything? Can we talk about this in the morning? The next day, approaching them and saying, I thought you liked it when I did that, or whatever. And then you find out, well, I do like it when you do that, but not when you do it 20 times in a row, because that starts to feel bad. And so, okay, learn something new. That kind of mindset, which is not an autopilot or a critical mindset, that, I wonder, is really, really powerful.
And so the numbers in the research that we found was that when someone would identify their spouse as having a curious mindset. If we couldn't ask the question, are you curious when it comes to this stuff? Everyone would say, well, of course I am. So we always have to ask.
I'm an above average driver.
Yes.
Everybody's an above average driver, right? Yeah.
So what did we find when someone identified their spouse as being curious?
If somebody felt that their spouse was curious, get these numbers. They were 3 times more likely to have a highly happy marriage. 3 times more likely. If someone identified their spouse, they said, my spouse is curious, they were also almost 3 times, I think it was 2.9, so almost 3 times more likely to be very happy with the frequency of how often that they were intimate as a couple. And there was another one, which I should have written down.
Was it the quality? No?
No. There was a third thing. Sorry, I'm looking at the graph in my head right now. Sorry, we literally just wrote this book. I turned it in at 2 o'clock today on the drive here. So I'm still grappling with it. But I know what it was. We found that if your spouse is curious, you're more likely to have sex more often, period. So it's not just that you're happy with the frequency, but the graph goes like this of how often you physically are together. And all of those things, there's a lot more research that we need to do on why and what does it look like and what are all the different factors. But this is a really, really big deal. And you actually saw a study about this.
Yeah, I was actually listening to a podcast of it's a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and she was talking about a study that is the number one appealing quality of when you meet someone. What is it that causes you to like them or to feel like, I like being around them? And the number one quality was that person curious? I mean, because you think of it, you're telling a story in a group or in a crowd, and someone goes, and then what happened? And then what happened? It pulls you in by them being excited, curious, interested in you.
Well, it's not just, it's not just, and then what happened about a random story, it's tell me about you.
Right.
Where did you grow up?
Right, and that's all part of it.
Yeah.
And that actually is in the kind of bigger construct of our marriage as opposed to just the intimate moments. What did we find with husbands and wives? How can that curiosity kind of play out? Where, for me, you're having a particularly bad day.
So one of the things that we found that matters is that there are 2 different types of listening. And these tend to be very, that make a difference, that impact your spouse. And these tend to be quite gender related. Again, generalizations, this is not always the case. But in general, and guys make note of this because this is a big deal, most of the time it makes women feel very connected to their husband when he will listen well. And one way of listening well is asking her this question. Tell me all about it. Let me just pull up a chair. I know you had a hard day. Tell me all about it. Even if it's literally just 10 or 15 minutes that you're trying to get into what's going on. What is it that was causing this angst? Now, here's the problem. Guys will often hear their wife, as they're trying to listen, guys will often hear their wife say, stop trying to fix it, right? I just want you to listen. Stop trying to fix it. And here's the thing, guys, for you to be aware, is that for you, it is self-evident that if you could just fix the problem, all of this angst would go away, right? Like all the men are nodding. Yes, that's obvious. All this angst would go away. You don't realize that for most women, probably your wife, maybe not always, but probably your wife, for most women, the problem that you're trying to fix isn't the problem that she most needs fixed. There's actually two problems. One is the technical issue, the fact that her boss embarrassed her in front of all of their colleagues, and she's upset about that. And the boss, what do you do? That's a technical problem, which is easy for you to go right to that. But that's actually only one of the problems. The other problem is how she's feeling about that. It's as if inside of her, there's a giant, those rubber bands where you like twist a rubber band over and over and over and it starts getting all tight and kinked up and hard. And it's as if those are her emotions, all tight inside, as she's thinking about how incredibly embarrassed she was in front of all of her colleagues when her boss says that, and how is she going to handle it in the morning, and what her other colleagues said when that happened, and all of that is inside of her. And so for you guys, there's actually a step 1 and a step 2 to listening well and to being curious. Step 2 is where you get to put on your Mr. Fix-It hat. You don't need to not be Mr. Fix-It. That's how God made you. But that's step 2. Step 1 is when you enter in with curiosity and you try to deal with those feelings and you ask her about those feelings and you pull out those feelings. How did you feel when your boss said that? Was anybody laughing at you? Pulling those out. Now, I can actually I'm looking at some of the guys' faces, and some of you are looking a little alarmed, actually, because some of you were thinking, like, I'm pulling out more of the feelings? Like, that's like gasoline on a flame, right? It's just going to make everything explode. I know it feels that way. Guys, switch the word picture, switch the analogy. Instead of gasoline on a flame, think of it as drawing poison out of a wound. You're pulling those tight feelings out of her. You'll start to see her relax as you say, tell me all about it. Tell me what was going on. How did that make you feel? You'll see her start to relax. And then you can move to step number 2, which is actually dealing with the problem. If she even needs the help, because, honestly, she could probably figure out an answer to the problem by herself if she had to. She can't feel listened to by herself.
So that curiosity piece, and now guys are probably thinking, how long? Are we talking 10 minutes? Are we talking an hour? I mean, just to calm the guys down a bit, she's not looking for you to be her girlfriend.
And ladies, we can't expect him to be our best girlfriend.
It's not how we're wired.
It's not how some men.
Some are.
But most of the time, for men, it's the ability to process emotional stuff. There's a bit of it's almost like pouring water into a glass. Like at some point, the glass is full. Somebody thought it was hilarious.
I'm done.
Yeah, I got nothing. At some point, the glass is full. And then, picture that there's some sort of a stopper in the bottom of it, and the water level leaks out, and his brain processes through all of that, and then you can pour more in. But just be aware that it's not that he's uncaring if he can't listen for an hour, right? It's just literally some men, that's just their brain wiring. They need to process it and then listen, and process it and then listen. So one of the things that we found in one of our other studies when we did the research for this book called The Kindness Challenge, we were talking about sort of different ways of building a skill. And one of the things that we found is that men in general said that they could, if they thought of it as, okay, I can listen for 15 minutes, that then they could enter in, and sometimes found out that they could go longer than that, but it's sort of thinking about it from that perspective.
And bringing this back to that 3 times thing that Shaunti was talking about earlier, it makes sense. Because in some of the couples in the interviews, it was him listening to me made me feel close to him and I wanted to be close and intimate with him. It's the old, sex begins in the kitchen idea. I mean, we've all heard that, but what does it look like? And that curiosity wins her heart, and it's sincere curiosity.
Right, not
it's
just
not
to
trying
get something.
To think, like, if I act like I'm really interested in her day, maybe later. No, it's not that.
It's got to be sincere.
So, guys, on our side, we have something roughly similar to the whole listening kind of thing. How many guys, I'm kind of a dreamer, and while I process stuff internally, I tend to like to talk about the dreams in the future that I'd love to see happen, or just kind of maybe do or think about or dream along with me. And Shaunti, being an analyst, would at times when I'd say, maybe this, and she'd go,
we can, when we retire, let's move to Maine and start a bed and breakfast.
And she said, you used to be in the restaurant business. You hated that. Why would you even want to do that? And think about the labor issues and all. And I was like, okay, I feel like a bucket of cold water, So then what you do for a lot of guys that I've heard, and myself included, you just kind of hold those dreams or stories internally. But if Shaunti, instead of analyzing, instead of, in her mind, fixing it, just entered in and went, what would that look like? What would a bed and breakfast look like? What do you think? Well, would you like to, would we take a trip up to Maine and do some scouting around, or what would you like? And she probably knows that I'm never going to execute on 99% of the dreams. It's kind of fun to talk about them and blue sky things.
And that's what, I can't remember what the percentage is, but from our last study, this is one of the things that a huge percentage of men said they wanted to just be able to dream out loud with their wives and not have, ladies, can I just say this out loud? I know what many of the women in the room were thinking when he said this, but what if he actually does want to open a bed and breakfast? like, what if he does actually want to fly to Maine and he takes me up on it? Holy crap, yeah. But you know what? This is honoring your spouse. This is honoring that he has all of this stuff inside of him, these dreams that are wanting to get out. Just like you have all these feelings, and he does too, obviously, that you want him to pull out. And to be able to just say, what would that look like? Ooh, that would be fun. You'd be so good at that. And let him dream.
And again, it's curiosity, and I can easily see how it leads to a 3x improvement in things. So the next secret that the happiest couples did is that they treated each other as their best friend. And so the question is, at least to us, the obvious question is, what is it that makes for a best friend? And a study that was done, it tried to answer this one, not from our research, but that we'd learned of. And if I were to ask you all, what is it? What are the qualities that cause two people to become best friends? A lot of us would probably say, well, similar temperament, shared values, kind of
the similar characteristics of things that matter to you.
Yeah. So interests, similar interests. Those are all important, but they pale in comparison to the number one quality, which was?
The number one factor that predicts friendships is geographic proximity. You're the best friends with the people that you see the most often. And we all know that's true, right? Because all of us have had really good friends where either we've moved away or they've moved away, and you love each other, but you just don't see each other as often. Even if somebody we had really close friends who moved to the other side of Atlanta. We're in the same city, but have you ever been to Atlanta and the Atlanta traffic? It's horrible, right? And so, they're really about 45 minutes away. So we only see them once every couple of months. And we love each other, but we're just not as close. It works exactly the same way in marriage. And this is one of the sneakiest factors that we almost missed because it was so simple, we almost kept overlooking it as the happiest couples would talk about it. And yet, it's shown out so brightly when we specifically looked at one of our most interesting study groups. Because in this study of 1,000 couples that we did for the book, we actually had a subset of people who had gone from the most desperate place in their marriage, the most unhappy in their marriage. And they had, by the time we conducted the study, they had, in some way, ended up in the highly happy marriages. And we wanted to know, what did these people do? What was it that changed? And we heard this over and over and over, that they spent time together. In fact, when we were in the middle of doing this research project, because this was a long research project, this was 3 or 4 years. When we were in the middle of this, we were speaking down in South Texas at a marriage conference. And there was a woman there who ran a massive counseling network. I think I'm describing it correctly. It was literally a network of all these different counseling centers. And the reason that this network was spreading so dramatically was that this group had figured out the secret sauce, so to speak, for how to save marriages. And so people came literally from all over the country to work with these counselors because they had so figured out how is it that you really help the most distressed marriages. And so this group had brought us in to do a marriage conference. And so I was I'm taking the advantage to talk to the director, the lady who'd started the whole thing and had started the method that eventually got proven to work so well. And I said, please tell me what your method is. And she kind of laughed. And, again, we're in the middle of this project. And she kind of laughed. She's like, you're not going to believe me because it's so simple. I'm like, no, please. Please tell, I'll accept anything. And she said, well, I'll tell you one of the main factors is that they come in for a consultation. This couple that's on the verge of divorce, they come in for a consultation, and I say, you know what? I will see you in 2 weeks if you are willing to do one thing during that 2 weeks. And that is, every day for the next 2 weeks, I want you to spend 30 minutes together having conversation and no negativity, no arguing for 30 minutes, just hanging out and talking. And she's like, and there cannot be arguing in that 30 minutes. If you want, you can set a timer. We're not allowed to argue during this stretch. And she said, I want you to do that every day for the next, if you can commit to that, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, and what else? And she's like, no, that's it. What do you mean that's it? No, that's it. That's the method. I mean, that wasn't the only method, because there's a lot of technical stuff involved in helping a couple through the problems. But she said, no, that's the secret sauce. And I went, what? And she said, here's what happens. They have been so at odds and getting further and further and further and further away. They're sitting in my office. They can't even look at each other. They can't talk to each other. And she said, you know why? They're not friends anymore. They don't like each other anymore. And often it's because things have been getting so bad that they spend less and less and less and less time together. And she said, when we force them to spend that time together just as friends, by the time they get to my office 2 weeks later, they've started to reconnect. They've started a little more goodwill. They started to like each other again as friends. If you're friends, you can figure out anything. And I started to watch this study group that we had of the people who were in the worst, most unhappy marriage situations, who had become the most happy. And I started to see that exact pattern play out over and over and over. I'll give you just one example. Do we have time for me to give one example? Okay. I'll give you just one example. So one of these couples was a young couple who were in their 30s who had 3 little kids. And they had been getting more and more and more distressed in their marriage. And they weren't spending any time together. They were in 2 different corners. I think one of them had consulted a divorce lawyer. They weren't quite there yet, but it was bad. And the wife, to her credit, she somehow figured this out on her own. And she said, I looked at my calendar one day, because, we're busy, both working, the kids have all these different activities, we're going a million different directions, we don't really see each other very often, which candidly is fine with me, because that's how bad it was. And she said, but I know that that's not how God designed marriage. So I looked at her calendar, and she said, 1 week, the week before, I went through every day and all the different hours of the calendar, and she said, I added up how much time the week before he and I had just spent just talking. Not like, hey, what are the kids doing at 3 o'clock, but like just talking as we used to. And she said the week before, it had been 15 minutes. And she said, no wonder we're at each other's throats. We're not even friends anymore. We don't even like each other. And so she went, what can I do to change this? This has to be changed immediately. And she said, immediately, it's not like our schedules are going to drastically change. We're not going to change jobs. We're not going to yank the kids out of their activities or, whatever. What is it that we can do differently right now? And she looked at their schedule, and she noticed that on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the late afternoon / early evening, her husband would come home from work early and take their, I don't know, he was probably 6-ish years old, take their son to t-ball practice twice a week. And she said, there is no reason in the world why I should have to load up a toddler and a baby and drive with my husband and son to t-ball practice, except that is 20 minutes in the car on the way there and 20 minutes on the way back twice a week. And she said at the beginning, that is literally all that changed. The only thing that changed is that she started to join her husband when he was taking the son to t-ball and just talking in the car for those 20 minutes there, 20 minutes back, catching up. And then they started to catch up again, and then started to share more, and then starting to want to share more. And then they started to grow close enough again that they could at least start talking about what some of these issues were. And we saw over and over again that if you will treat your spouse like a best friendship that needs to be preserved by time together, that is one of the most protective things that you can do for your marriage.
So go to Home Depot with your husband often. I think we should probably...
You want to wrap it up?
Yeah.
Okay. So
this is
the last one for tonight. So The last topic is actually really simple. And there is another factor that is very, very misunderstood and has been very, very misreported in the Christian community. How many of you have heard that the rate of divorce is the same in the church? Just raise your hands if you've heard the rate of divorce. Seriously, raise your hands. I'd be very curious that you've heard the rate of divorce is the same in the church. So it looks like it's about 70%-ish of the church has heard that. I had too. I'd said it from the stage because everybody has heard the rate of divorce is the same in the church. It turns out that that is absolutely not true. And one of the most protective factors in your marriage is putting God at the center of your marriage. And the way that it's tested demographically and the way that it's tested statistically, you can't test the intensity of someone's prayer life on a survey, right? Like, it's pretty hard to do. And so there are several different ways of looking at it. And the reason for the big myth and the reason for the misunderstanding comes from a misunderstanding of an old George Barna survey.
George Barna, the pollster.
The pollster. Some of you probably have heard of George Barna. He does studies that basically look at things of faith and looks at the Christian community in different ways. And in this one study 20 years ago, he decided to study belief systems and divorce rates. And so this is when you call people on the phone and you ask, are you a Christian? Are you Jewish? Are you atheist? You know, like those kinds of questions. Those people who answered in those different belief system ways, they had the same divorce rates. However, it got reported as...
But and that shouldn't be surprising, since if you ask someone, an average American, what are you?
Your religious beliefs.
The majority would say
believers, Christians, right. And so it got reported in the news as George Barna has found that the rate of divorce is the same in the church. Here's the problem. He excluded whether they went to church from the analysis because that wasn't what they were trying to study. They had asked the question, do you go to church? But they didn't include it because that wasn't their point. They were just looking at beliefs. So I partnered with Barna and I bought that data set and we reran all the numbers with that factor added back in of, does the person actually go to church? Since that's one of the only things that you can actually study in terms of, is their faith a part of their life? And here's the amazing news, is that, and this is, by the way, not even controversial. Every study, I'm not exaggerating this is a literal truth. Literally every study that has ever been done to try to understand the impact of church attendance has found the same thing. The divorce rate plummets. If you actually go to church, if you are part of a community, if you are sitting under godly teaching, if you're a part of a community where someone's going to notice, hey, is everything going on with you and Bob? Is everything going on okay? Because I've noticed you seem a little tense. Those kinds of things absolutely matter. And the divorce rate drops, depending on the study, anywhere from 25 to 50% or more. Actually, a study 2 years ago from Harvard found that the divorce rate drops 57% amongst people who go to church. Why does that matter? What did we find in our study? Is that it's about putting God at the center of your life and being a part of this community. And sitting under that godly teaching and letting the Holy Spirit change your heart and your mind, it will matter. And it was interesting when we were doing the research. I will ask people questions, just randomly
Shaunti is
questions.
Positively fearless. She'll approach people if they're looking bored, they're a target.
Kind of true.
I mean, she's been almost arrested a couple of times on the Atlanta MARTA
subway.
subway train, just by handing out surveys and asking people to take them while they're on their way to work.
I mean, you know what? If they're bored and they're just sitting there not doing anything, they're kind of fair game. But, if they don't want to talk, that's fine.
So talk about some of the folks when you would encounter them, like in a food court or a coffee shop.
Yep. So
what you saw.
I would often go up to a couple that looked like they were at peace with one another. They looked, happy-ish. Yeah. And we had a way, it's too complicated to explain, but we had a way of having like a little mini determination of which category they fit into, of happiness, sort of middling, unhappy, that kind of thing. And it was astounding how often when I said, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm a social researcher and I'm doing a book on happy marriages, and can I ask you guys a question? Sometimes I actually carried a book with me so I could show them I wasn't just weird, right? It might be weird, but that this was like a legit project. And I said, can I ask you a question? Just one question, what do you attribute your happiness to in your marriage? The fact that you've got a joyful, thriving marriage, what do you attribute that to? It is amazing how often the couple would kind of look at each other and then look at me and say, it's because of Jesus Christ. And you could tell that they were going, oh, it's a chance to witness to a social researcher. You could tell they were all excited about this. But that happened over and over and over again. And listen, I know we've got to wrap up. We're out of time. But just as an encouragement, all of these things that we have said are crucial. But like we said, they're mix and match. They're the kinds of things that, try this, try that, ask your spouse maybe what they want you to do. But realize that it's always going to be missing something if you don't put God at the center of your marriage, because he's really the only one who can bring transformation. You can try and you can work. He's the one who can change hearts.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you for being here tonight. I know that in our Friday night kind of series that we have in February, we call them Friday nights, February, date nights, things like that, we would have more of a date setting of what we would do for you guys. Tonight was a little bit different with a seminar-type setting. So when you leave, we're actually going to give you a gift. As you go out the door, it's going to have an envelope. It's going to have some questions in it that you can follow up on the stuff that you heard tonight. And then there's going to be a gift to help you go on a date with your spouse. And so be sure to get that gift as you go out the door. And I want to close this in a time of prayer. Thank you so much. I do want to say one more thing before we close in prayer. If you're interested in some of their books at the book table and you came tonight and you find yourself without the resources or whatever, for whatever reason that you're not able to do it, we don't want anybody to go out the door without having the ability to do it. Just ask. Just see me, see Lisa, somebody at the table or something, and say something about it. We will help you get that book because we want everybody to have resources to build a solid home. And so that's kind of what we're about. Thank you guys so much for the work, your integrity in the work that you're doing, and your willingness to take the blessing that God's given you and to pass it on to other people. Thank you so much for that. Lisa, are there any other details that you have for us? All right, let me close this in prayer again. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll close the night out. Father, we thank you for your grace. We thank you for truth. We thank you for just your guidance and being a light in our lives. I thank you for the testimony that we hear tonight, that at the center of a happy home, a happy relationship, is your son Jesus. So help us to focus on that and to practice that and to put that into place. Help us with your wisdom and your grace and your mercy to love our spouse the way you created us to love one another. Go with us now. Bless our homes. Keep us safe. For in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.